The gates of hell are going to open in the Gaza Strip on Hamas. Are we returning to fighting in Gaza? United States President Donald Trump said that all hell would break out on Hamas in the Gaza Strip if they did not honor the ceasefire agreement with Israel, and it's beginning to look like they want to test that proposition. The plans to strike Hamas in Gaza have nearly been completed. However, there is a possibility that this plan won't be implemented, and all Hamas has to do to avoid it is to release the remaining hostages. Prime Minister Netanyahu said as much in a statement on Sunday evening, adding that if Hamas continues to entrench in its position and does not release our hostages, there will be further consequences. Netanyahu is waiting for United States Special Envoy Steve Witkoff to arrive in Israel this week for further consultations before moving forward. However, carrying out the threat will endanger the hostages if they haven't yet been released. So, the stick that may convince Hamas comes precisely from Cairo. Meanwhile, the security forces are continuing their activity as part of the operation to thwart terror in northern Samaria and the surrounding area. In the northern arena, on the Syrian border, one day after Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz declared that they instructed the IDF to protect the Druze community in Syria from rebel forces leading the Syrian country now, Israel also transferred aid worth of 3 million shekels to the Druze community in Syria. And next door in Lebanon, new details have come to light about the assassination of the late Hassan Nasrallah and the beepers attack on Hezbollah leaders. Nasrallah's son told media portals that my father fell into a deep depression after the elimination of Faoud Shukar and the beepers operation. This is because Israel's powerful attacks affected not only the Hezbollah Secretary General, but severely harmed the morale of the entire terrorist organization, Hezbollah. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 514 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in the region who are acting under the command of Iran's Revolutionary Guards, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to invite you to click the subscribe button so that you stay tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Now for the news, and we start with the Gaza Strip. In the Israeli government, preparations have been underway in recent weeks for a state of maximum pressure on the Gaza Strip in order to lead to the release of the remaining hostages. Now, the gates of hell are about to open on Hamas if they continue to refuse to release these hostages. The Israeli government is preparing a dramatic move in Gaza that includes a massive evacuation of civilians, cutting off electricity and water supplies, and renewing the fighting with full force, expected to begin in the coming days. Now, let's take a second before we look at how the IDF will renew the fighting to understand what just happened and why we are going back into fighting. Over the weekend, Hamas rejected Israel's demands to extend Phase A of the ceasefire and the hostage release deal and simultaneously conduct negotiations on Phase B, so now a new proposal is now on the table coming from American envoy Steve Witkoff. The outline of this new proposal involves two major phases. It proposes extending the temporary ceasefire and continuing the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip for 50 days until the end of the month of Ramadan and the end of Passover. In return, Hamas would release all the living hostages and the remains of those who have died, murdered, in captivity in two phases. The first at the start of the ceasefire period, and the second group at the end of the ceasefire period. During this time, negotiations would take place for a permanent ceasefire or an arrangement to cease the war. Witkoff's outline fully meets Israel's demands because it enables a release in two phases without stretching out the suffering of the families and the hostages held by Hamas, but postpones Israel's needs to declare a permanent ceasefire guaranteed by the United States. This strategy uses a big stick and a small carrot for the Hamas terrorist organization. As has been published, the big stick is a tangible threat of reoccupying the Gaza Strip in a lightning operation by an IDF force the size of 5 divisions, a large portion of which is already deployed along the edge of the Gaza Strip. In addition, Israel has not withdrawn from the Philadelphia corridor as it committed to begin during the end of the first phase of this deal, a phase that officially ended yesterday. The carrot is Israel's willingness to bring humanitarian aid and caravans, small houses, into the Gaza Strip and to allow infrastructure repairs that would ease the population's distresses, which shows growing signs of resentment towards Hamas for not doing enough to alleviate their hardship. With all of that in mind, the next step for Israel, which comes after repeated violations of the agreement by Hamas and the psychological terror of increasing the demands to continue the negotiations for the release of the hostages, is that Israel moves to a pressure plan on Hamas composed of several stages. The first stage, already begun, involved halting humanitarian aid, although in practice it seems that its impact on the ground is rather minor. In the next stages, Israel plans to once again move Gaza's residents from the north of the Gaza Strip to the south, and if that doesn't help, to cut off the electricity flow into Gaza. To explain, there are about 30 very large pressure levers on Hamas, and this strategy uses 3 of them in a very strong way. The first lever is Hamas's genuine fear of the IDF entering the Gaza Strip in a way that would defiantly eliminate the civilian and military power centers that Hamas still has there, forcing their leadership to remain underground indefinitely or to come out and surrender. The second lever is the Gazan population, which is demanding that Hamas relieve their distress. In the context of putting pressure on the terrorist organization in this regard, this morning Israel has announced a freeze on humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip, as long as Hamas continues to reject the Witkoff outline. The decision has been made in coordination with the Trump administration just at the start of the month of Ramadan, which only intensifies the pressure on Hamas in this respect. The third lever, the strongest of all, is the backing that Israel receives from United States President Donald Trump, and for the time being, there is no sign that Trump is losing interest in resolving the crisis in the Middle East. On the contrary, he is showing growing interest in it. However, despite all of this, Hamas is acting tough, mainly relying on the hostages that it still holds, assuming that Israel will do everything it can to avoid renewing the campaign in the Strip so as not to cause the hostages to be harmed. But from the declarations by Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz over the past week, Hamas may get the impression that if they do not accept Israel's demands, they can threaten to execute some of the living hostages. But despite the wave of statements rejecting the Witkoff outline, Hamas has not categorically ruled out extending the first phase of the hostage deal. Hamas spokesman Hazem Qassem clarified on Sunday that the terrorist organization rejects extending the first phase in the Israeli format, which will not lead to the start of negotiations on Phase B. But he did not rule out another outline. Elsewhere, senior Hamas official Mahmoud Mardawi claimed on Sunday evening that the terrorist organization would not accept an extension of the first phase and insists on implementing the agreement in phases as signed. Another Hamas source told El Arabiya El Jaded that the terrorist group in Gaza is rising its alert levels in anticipation of the possibility of a renewed war. And back in Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday at the start of the cabinet meeting that in light of Hamas's refusal to the Witkoff outline, we decided to prevent any entry of goods and supplies into Gaza. If Hamas continues to entrench in its position and does not release the hostages, there will be further consequences. At the end of the discussion, we decided on the following steps. Israel adopts the outline proposed by the President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, for a temporary ceasefire during the Ramadan month and Passover. we are in full coordination with President Trump and his people. Based on the information that Israel has, Hamas is currently holding 59 hostages. Up to 24 of them are alive and at least 35 deceased. We are not giving up on any of them, and we are determined to bring them all home. According to Witkoff's proposal, on the first day of this outline, half of the hostages will be released in one phase. At the end of the outline, if an agreement is reached, the remaining hostages will be released also in one phase. Netanyahu further clarified, contrary to the claims I hear from commentators in the studios of TV stations, Israel is not in violation, while Hamas has repeatedly violated the agreement of Phase A. According to the original agreement, Israel can return to fighting after 42 days if it concludes that the negotiations are not effective. This clause is supported by a side letter from the previous American administration and has also received the backing and support of the Trump administration. And it must be emphasized that Hamas is currently seizing all the supplies and goods sent to the Gaza Strip. It is abusing the Gazan population that tries to get the aid. It shoots at them, turning humanitarian aid into a terror budget that is directed against us. We will not agree to this under any circumstances. Guys, it's important to remember that Ramadan started on Saturday, and the Gazan Strip will not survive the holiday without humanitarian aid. And so, every day that Israel insists on no aid entry tightens the pressure on Hamas, and slowly we will begin to see the meaning on the ground. Right now, all the pieces are in mid-air and there is no clear sign of where they will land. The mediators are currently working to get Hamas to accept the new Witkoff outline. Israel has already accepted it. Therefore, the hostage families will continue to suffer, the nerves of the Israeli public will continue to fry, and Hamas will continue to wage a psychological war that is getting dirtier and more brutal, because it is practically the only means it has to influence the decision makers in Israel. Only towards the end of the week, and maybe next week, will the picture become clearer. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development related to the hostages and the situation in the Gaza Strip, and as always, we ask you to help spread the truth by sharing these videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and above all, click that subscribe button if you haven't already, so you remain tuned to the truth in real time and never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. Unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem and for our soldiers. And switching our focus to Judea and Samaria, Israeli security forces are continuing their activities as part of the operation to thwart terror in northern Samaria and in additional cities and villages in this area. During the month of February, security forces eliminated about 25 terrorists, among them arms and weapons dealers, terrorists who manufactured, planted, and threw explosive devices, as well as terrorists who planned attacks and posed a threat to our forces. In addition, about 350 wanted individuals were arrested, around 120 weapons were seized, and hundreds of explosive devices were destroyed. Defense Minister Katz commented in light of the events in the late week in this sector, saying that we are at war against the Islamic terror in Judea and Samaria. We will not return to what was in the past. Of course, the terrorists and the criminal gangs which the IDF are fighting against in Judea and Samaria are not sitting back and watching all of this. They are also launching operations against the IDF troops as well as the Israeli civilians. The Shin Bet reported stopping over 1,000 terrorist attacks in 2024 and has already stopped several hundreds more since the start of 2025. This is a constant reality here, and the security services never take a day off or even a minute off. But occasionally, the terrorists catch a break and manage to execute a terrorist attack, such as the ramming and the stabbing attack near Caesarea last week, which left 13 people wounded and hurt. When the terrorists manage to land a blow, the only thing to do is to shut the attack down as fast as possible, which the police are very good at doing, and then turn to care to those who have been hurt. This is where the men and women of Magen David Adom come in. For the last 16 months, Magen David Adom has been working hard to help those hurt by rocket attacks, terrorism, and everyday emergencies. They provide first aid to all people, regardless of their faith. I'm talking about Jews, Muslims, Christians, and anyone else in need. Whether it's treating injuries or helping a woman give birth, these volunteers are always ready to help. But their work never stops. They need donations to keep going. Medical supplies are used up quickly, and training for future emergencies is constant. So if you want to help their effort, please donate at www.savelifeisrael.com. Your support saves lives, and Israel needs Magen David Adom, and they need you. So thank you, and now let's get back to the news, and we're shifting our focus to the northern arena. The question on everyone's minds is whether Israel will intervene in the conflict raging deep inside Syria, about 80 kilometers beyond the border, on behalf of the Druze population. Israel has long had deep and mutually beneficial relationship with the Druze communities, both here in Israel and throughout the wider region. There are many Druze soldiers and commanders in the IDF, and there have been many Druze members of Knesset, the Israeli parliament, including judges, mayors of small towns, and community leaders. Over the past month, under the guidance of Minister Gidon Sa'ar, the Foreign Ministry of Israel allocated 3 million shekels for humanitarian aid to Druze residents in Syria. And so far, 8,000 food packages have been delivered, and in the coming days, another 2,000 packages will be delivered. Each package is worth 300 shekels. Yesterday, Netanyahu and Katz issued an unusual threat to the regime in Syria and warned against harming Druze residents in the city of Jaramana, located about 7 kilometers from Damascus. It appears that the Islamic militias identifying with ISIS are trying to conquer and subjugate the non-Muslim population in the area, and the Israeli officials declared, "We will not allow the extremist Islamic terror regime in Syria to harm the Druze. If the regime harms them, it will be harmed by us." The two said, adding, "We are committed to our Druze brothers in Israel to do everything to prevent harm to their Druze brothers in Syria, and we will take all necessary steps to ensure their safety." Following Israel's unusual threat, and after 2 tense days, cautious calm prevailed today in Jaramana, in the rural areas of Damascus in Syria. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in this matter. And as always, we ask you to keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And don't forget to check out our news website at www.tbnisrael.com to get in-depth coverage in real-time reports on what's happening in Israel. And next door to Syria, in Lebanon, new details are coming to light regarding the assassination of former Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah almost 6 months ago. His son, Jawad Nasrallah, told the Lebanese TV program Panorama Today on Sunday that my father fell into a deep depression after the elimination of Fuad Shukar and the Beepers operation. Everyone who met him said he was no longer with us. He went on to describe how Israel's powerful attacks affected not only the Secretary General of Hezbollah, but they severely harmed the terrorist organization's morale as a whole. Remarks in a similar vein were heard last month from senior Hezbollah official Wafik Safa, who gave an interview with Hezbollah's media portal El Mayadin. In the interview, Safa said that Nasrallah spoke to him on the phone for the last time on the day of the Beepers attack on September 17, 2024, when he was in a difficult mental state. He initiated the last call I had with the master because of the Beepers day. That is the only day on which I did not dare to call or contact him. I knew the mental state he was in. He's definitely a brave and heroic man in every sense of the word, but when it had to do with the resistance and the people of the resistance and jihad, it was the end of the world for him. Well, what can we say except that every terrorist organization in the world should take note of these words and know that this is what awaits them as well if they continue to threaten the lives and the safety of Israel or any other part of the world. Therefore, dear viewers, it is important to ask you to continue spreading the truth, share, follow us, but most importantly, pray for the people of Israel. Pray for the well-being of our hostages who are held in the Gaza Strip in the hands of Hamas. Pray that they will return safely to their families. Continue to pray for the IDF soldiers wherever they are fighting, in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, in Syria, or in Judea and Samaria. Pray for the peace of the people of Israel, and most importantly, unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.